Nightbirds on Nantucket by Joan Aiken, Chapter 3. Talking to Penitence, the Veiled Lady, Hopscotch, Dido makes a promise. Long after dark had fallen, Dido was still loitering on the quarterdeck, her brow wrinkled in thought. Twice since her talk with Captain Casket, she had gone below, tapped on the panel in the captain's stateroom, and tried to persuade the hidden occupant of the little room beyond to come out. Her first attempt had met with no response. Next time, the only reaction had been a fierce, miserable whisper from behind the panel. "Go away! Go away! Whoever you are, I shan't come out. I know you're only trying to trick me to go up on deck and be drowned." Dido saw that she would have to be clever. "What do you do all day long in there?" she asked, the beginnings of a plan sprouting in her mind. There was no answer. She had not really expected one. She went off, half to herself. "Well, I don't wonder you gets blue-deviled if you does nothing but sit and think of drowning all the time. Cheesy, I calls it." She had left the cabin, shutting the door behind her with a loud, annoying slam. After more than 16 hours of frantic, continuous work, the captured whale was all cut up and melted down. Mr. Slycarp's watch staggered below, blind and speechless with fatigue. At last the moment arrived that Dido had been waiting for. She stretched, rose, left the quarterdeck, and went along to the try-works, which were simmering down now to a dull red glow. Half a dozen weary men were scrubbing the deck with ashes. Their shadows flitted to and fro under a towering Arctic moon. From time to time they paused in their labors, dipped bits of hardtack in the still molten blubber, and chewed them. The good-natured Mr. Pardon was supervising the work. "Why, dearie," he said in surprise, "you should have been in your bunk hours ago. Captain Casket tells me he's given you a stateroom his stateroom for to be company for little Miss Penitence. Mr. Slycarp's not best pleased at having to move in with me, but 'tis more fitting for you than lying up here on a donkey's breakfast. And I guess you'll be better than able, and I guess you'll be better able than a man to look after the poor little ailing lass." Dido nodded soberly. "Mr. Pardon," she said. "Well, dearie, what's Captain Casket's little girl like?" "Like?" Mr. Pardon scratched his white head, puzzled. "Why, I guess she's like all little gals. Sews a sampler, reads a lesson. Mrs. Casket always used to hear her lessons when she was alive, poor lady." "But what's she like?" Dido persisted. "What kind of games does she like to play?" "Play? Why, I don't know if she plays any games, but my nephew, Nate, here'd know better than I do. His home's right next to the Casket place." "Games?" said Nate when appealed to. "Don't reckon she ever played any. Very quiet little thing, sort of peaky. Her ma always kept her pretty much at her stitching and so forth." "Blimey," muttered Dido. "What a set-out. No wonder he's such a miser. He's such a misery, Mr. Pardon. Do you reckon as how you could make a shuttlecock for her out of whalebone or summit? I could stick it with gull's feathers." "I don't see why not," Mr. Pardon said doubtfully. "Guess it would be simple enough. But what would Captain Casket think?" "Mrs. Casket always used to say that toys were inventions of the devil." "I guess he'd have to put up with it," Dido said. "He asked me if I'd try to take dutiful Patience out of herself. She's pining for her ma." Nate was interested in the scheme. "I could always make a whalebone bat," he offered, "and some checkers. Or spillikins." "Could you? That'd be bang up." Dido went below, well pleased with the way matters were shaping. The big cabin was lit by a hanging whale oil lamp. Dido turned the wick up to its brightest. Then she listened. No sound came from dutiful Penitence, so Dido banged the cabin door, opened and shut some drawers several times as loudly as she could, and overturned a chair with a tremendous clatter. She heard a sleepy stir from beyond the panel. "Papa, what's the matter?" said a scared voice. "Is it a storm?" Dido made no answer. She climbed up onto the chart table, and then, after carefully judging the distance, jumped 4 feet to a wall shelf where she clung like a squirrel. From there, making use of the hanging compass, she swung to the bed, landing with a thud. Then she crawled to the bedpost, put her knee on the open drawer, and clawed herself across to another shelf, aware as she did so, though without showing it, that the panel had opened a crack and that she was being watched. She balanced on a shelf, gauging the distance to a chair. "Who are you?" asked an astonished voice. "And what do you think you're doing? Where's Papa?" "I told you already," Dido said without looking round. "I'm Dido Twite. Your pa's given me his cabin." She steadied herself and sprang. The chair fell and threw her to the floor. "Drat it!" Dido said coldly, getting up and rubbing her knee. "Now I shall have to start again." "Start what again?" Taking no notice of the question, Dido climbed back onto the chart table. This time she chose a different route, throwing herself like a flying fox onto a large sea chest, which seemed full of bottles to judge from the loud clatter when she landed on it. She scowled in concentration, considering a sideways clamber across the door as against an awkward diagonal jump to the bed. She chose the former. "What are you doing?" the voice repeated. Dido dragged herself up with difficulty and turned round. She was now perching like a gargoyle on a sort of dresser. "Why?" she said expertly. "What do you think I'm doing? What does it look as if I'm doing? Making cheese? I'm getting round the room without touching the floor, of course. I should have thought any ninny could see that. You must be a slow top. Now don't interrupt again, you put me off." She knit her brows and pressed her lips together, and with a mighty spring succeeded in launching herself from the dresser to the fallen chair, which slid conveniently across the bed. "Now I'm going to sleep," Dido announced. "Mind you don't make a noise and wake me." She turned out the light. All this time she never looked toward the open hatchway. Yawning loudly, she snuggled down under the blankets. Silence fell. After a longish pause, the voice asked, "Why didn't you want to touch the floor?" Dido made no answer, but instead let out a slight snore. Very early the next morning, Dido, who needed little sleep after her 10-month nap, woke and scurried up the deck before any sound came from dutiful Penitence. The Sarah casket, all her barrels now filled with whale oil, was speeding south under a clear sky. Some of the men were hard at work hammering on lids of the great hogsheads. Twice the height of Dido before these were lowered into the hold. Others were scrubbing every inch of the deck and bulwarks with ashes and bits of blubber, even climbing into the rigging to wipe the shrouds. Soot and ashes flew away on the fresh breeze, and the ship by degrees began to look so tidy and clean that Dido could hardly believe it was the same in which only the day before whale oil had run like greasy dark ink over the deck. The kindly Mr. Pardon had contrived, time out of his duties, to make a shuttlecock. He gave it to Dido. "It ain't very grand. I made a bit of a mucks of it," he apologized, "but I reckoned you'd druther have it soon than fancy. I'll make a better one now I got the hang. I'm real pleased to do it. Young'un should have playthings, and Nate, he's fixing you a right handsome battledore, but 'twon't be finished yet a piece, because Mrs. Slycop sent him up to scrub the crow's nest." Dido looked up and saw a tiny figure miles up, it seemed, in the clear, piercing air. Nate waved a scrubbing brush cheerfully, and she waved back. This here's a first-rate shuttlecock," she told Mr. Pardon. "Just what I wanted. Captain Casket's little girl will be astonished, I reckon." "Don't forget your breakfast, dearie," Mr. Pardon said, as she turned to go below. "That's a notion," Dido said. She added to herself, "I dare say dutiful Pen has had enough of plum jelly to last a lifetime. Let's see what a sight a summer else does for her." She skipped along to the caboose by the wheelhouse. "What's for breakfast?" she asked briskly. "Ah, it is a little chick passenger." The black cook gave her his beaming grin. "I have nice foo-foo, also nice plum duff. We celebrate last barrelful, see?" "What's foo-foo?" "Mush with molasses is very good." "No thanks," Dido said, eyeing the black stuff distastefully. "Can I have 2 heaps of plum duff? I'll take some down for dutiful P. She might fancy it." "He's picky and choosy, that one," the cook said, shaking his head. "He's not fancy my cooking." However, he dealt out 2 large portions of delicious raisin pudding made with drippings and potash. "You like some coffee?" "Thanks, mister. Any milk?" "Not yet, honey. Goat she took and died. In some month we make Galapagos Island, then maybe coconut milk." Dido ran down the companionway with the food. Back in the cabin, she limbered up before breakfast by doing 2 circuits of the room, falling only once. While so engaged, she noticed that the panel had opened an inch and that an eye was peering at her through the crack. Refreshed, Dido sat down at the chart table where she had put the plates of plum duff and began to eat one portion with smacking sounds of enjoyment. "Nibblish good pro," she remarked loudly. "Better'n me ma makes, anyhows." When she finished her plateful, she got up, leaving the second portion untouched and well in view, took the shuttlecock out of her pocket, and began to kick it into the air. As Mr. Pardon had said, it was not a very well-made one, being slightly unbalanced, and at first Dido found difficulty in keeping it up for more than 2 or 3 kicks. She persevered, however, bounding about the room until she was breathless and bruised from collisions with furniture. Meanwhile, she was watched with silence, astonished attention from the hatchway. "This room ain't big enough," Dido complained presently, when she was becoming more experienced with the shuttlecock and had worked her score up to 23. "I'm a-going on deck, I am, where there's plenty of room." She departed, slamming the door behind her, although strongly tempted to linger and look through the keyhole. She knew this would be foolish. Instead, she clattered up the companion stair and went out to the quarterdeck. However, she soon found that there was little room even here to practice her game, for the men were tidying out the hold to make room for the last casks of whale oil, and had brought all the stores up on deck. There was such a general hubbub of to and fro activity that Dido seemed to be constantly underfoot in everybody's way. Mr. Slycart gave her a scowl and muttered something about putting her to mend sails or lipper the decks. Dido looked about for Mr. Pardon, but saw that he was busy encouraging the men at the pumps, while Nate, playing on a sort of zither made of whalebone, helped them keep time. They were singing, "Strong to pleasant wake to Guam, winds are favoring, seas are calm, midway down to Pokaku, typhoon cuts our mainmast through, Easter disappointment gnome. Through the watery world we roam, Tristan, Fogo, Trinidad, winds contrary, weather bad, Christmas, Easter, Kawala, Jane. When shall we see Brantport again?" The zither gave Dido an idea. There were bundles of whalebone pieces lying about the deck of assorted sizes and shapes. "I reckon they can spare me a bit," she said to herself. "I won't bother to ask Captain Casket. He looks a mite caged." The captain was taking no part in the bustle. He leaned against the mainmast, with eyes fixed on the far horizon. Dido picked up a piece of bone about the size of a walking stick and quietly made off with it. "Now I wants a tool, land's sakes, they must have plenty on a ship this size, if I could find out where they keeps 'em." There was a smith's forge by the foremast and a carpenter's bench aft of the try-works, but both of these were too much under observation at present. Hoping to find other stores, Dido nipped down the forward hatchway into the blubber room. This was unoccupied now, and silent. A sort of tide mark on the wall showed where yesterday the blubber had been stacked knee-deep. At the moment, the room was being used for the temporary storage of things taken from the hold. A pile of oakum and sail canvas occupied most of the floor. Dido turned to leave, seeing nothing she could use, but then stopped, arrested by the unexpected sight of a boot protruding from under the canvas. It was bottle green, elastic-sided, quite unlike the brogans worn by the sailors. It looked like an English lady's boot. Where could it have come from? Puzzled and inquisitive, Dido gave it a tug and then jumped back with a yelp of alarm as the boot disappeared swiftly beneath the canvas. There was a foot inside it. Curiosity overcoming her caution, Dido approached the heap once more and pulled aside some folds of canvas. A sort of writhing motion went up in the middle of the heap. On the middle of the heap, the sailcloth was dispatched, and suddenly, rather as a serpent darts out of its hole, a figure of a tall, veiled lady uncoiled and shot from under the pile of stuff. She towered over the quailing Dido, who would have run for it had she not been held fast by the ear. "What are you doing here?" said the lady in a low, grating tone. "Please, ma'am, I didn't mean no harm, gulped Dido. I was only looking for a corkscrew. A likely story, prying and meddling where you've no business to be. Repulsive child, you deserve to be severely punished. Now listen here, miss. Yes, ma'am? If you so much as mention that you have seen me to anyone at all, I shall learn of it, and it will be the worse for you. Do you wish to return to you wish to return to England, do you not? Yes, ma'am, Dido whispered, very much astonished. Then you had better keep a still tongue in your head. Otherwise your chances of ever seeing London River again are very, very small. Do you understand? Now go. Dido needed no encouragement. Something in the veiled lady's aspect had struck her with mortal terror, but she received a final warning in the form of a box on the ear that shot her out of the doorway. Numb and chattering with fright, she scurried up to the companionway and back on deck. Luckily, nobody had noticed her come out. The whole crew were trying to manhandle a spare anchor out of its usual resting place so as to cram a few casks of oil underneath it. Frightened though she was, Dido kept her wits about her. She grabbed a handful of tools from the carpenter's bench and then, still gasping for breath, ran down to the captain's cabin. She was too discomposed to notice that the closet door shut with a click as she entered the room, but she did observe when a little more recovered that the plum duff on the second plate had been eaten. She grinned to herself and, sitting up, inspected the tools she had taken. Choosing a drill, she set to work on her whalebone rod. It proved a long, fiddling task, which occupied most of the day. Though aware that she was being watched, Dido pretended not to notice. Twice she broke off to make a tour of the room without touching the deck, each time attempting a new route. She also played several games of shuttlecock and chalked herself out a hopscotch square on the chart table. Here she encountered a difficulty, however. I wished as how I had a pebble, she remarked aloud, or a marble, or a penny, or even a button would do. Oh well, she sighed. I can't play hopscotch, that's all. Funny how I has a fancy to play hopscotch. Anyway, I reckon it's dinner time. I'll nip up to the camboose and see what's cooking. She took the empty plates and left the room. All the time she had been working and playing, part of her mind was occupied with the puzzle of the mysterious veiled lady in the blubber room. Could she be a stowaway? She might have hidden in the hold, obliged to take refuge elsewhere because of the general turnout. But where could she have come on board? What did she live on? Did none of the crew know about her presence? Somebody must know, Dido said to herself as she absently accepted 2 bowls of porpoise chowder from the cook. Somebody must know, and must have told her about me. Else how did she twig I was English? I wonder who told her. She returned to the cabin, ate her meal, and flung herself on the bed for a nap, burying her face in the pillow and letting out snores. For a long time there was silence, then she heard a cautious clink. She redoubled her snores, shutting her eyes so tight that she saw red and green stars. At last, yawning loudly, she opened her eyes. The second chowder bowl was empty. Beside it lay a large leather button. Well, I never, Dido exclaimed in astonishment. Fancy my not noticing that there button afore. Just what I needed for hopscotch. Now, can I remember the rules, I wonder? Having dumped the chowder bowls on the floor, she climbed onto the table. Addressing herself as if she were a slow-witted pupil, she proceeded to rehearse the rules of hopscotch, and then played it very enjoyably for an hour or so. Tired of hopscotch, she set to work once more on the piece of whalebone. When this was hollowed into a tube, she made a series of holes along it, and a mouthpiece. If blown on hard enough, it produced a plaintive sound, like the call of a hungry bird. After much labor, Dido had several notes adjusted to her satisfaction and was able to play God Save King Jim and Who'll Buy My Sweet Lavender. This was received with awestruck and flattered silence from the watcher behind the panel. I wished I knowed a few more tunes, Dido said at length. Seems as how, while I'd been asleep, I forgot most of the ones I used to know. Ah, well, maybe I'll remember some more tomorrow. I'll just step out for a breath of fresh air now and then go to Kip. She went in search of Nate and found him sprawled on the main deck, weaving a rope mat of in a rather inattentive and dreamy fashion while he hummed over the words of a shanty. Oh, it's golly and roll, me boys, ripple and run. So hold your hand, lads, the chase has begun. Tally-ho till she breaches, come join in the fun. We're off on a Nantucket sleigh ride. It's flurry and scurry, she bolts and she sounds, and something, tum-till-tum grounds, and something else ending in bounds or in rounds. Hey-ho for a Nantucket sleigh ride. Oh, hello, chick, he broke off on seeing Dido. I've got something for you. Finished as soon as old man Slycop went below, and he brought out a beautiful little battledore ingeniously made from woven strips of bone. Coo, said Dido. It's Naffy. Ain't you clever? I'll lay Dutiful Pen won't be able to hold off when she sees this. Could you make another one, do you reckon? Guess so, said Nate agreeably. He started singing again. Tum tiddle tum tiddle tum grounds. Pull on head to head as his noddle he rounds. Can you think of some rhymes for sounds, chick? Dido could not. Does you make 'em up then? She asked, much impressed. Sure. I always used to make up verses at home about sheep and funerals, you know, and pickled tamarinds and so forth. Tell me ma, she's a widder, and so she gets fidgety. Caged like? I reckon so. She allowed us how I'd better go to sea before I drove her clean wild. So, as Uncle Lige was second mate with Captain Casket, he fixed it. They don't mind my verses on board ship. In fact, they come in quite handy. Finding Nate such a kindred spirit, Dido showed him her whalebone pipe. That's cunning, he said, blowing on it. Mighty smart work for a little un. Who learned you to do that? My pa, Dido said proudly. He plays on the hautboy, so he learned me how to make a toodle pipe. Say, we'll be able to have some fine concerts now, when old Slycop's under hatches. It's time I was under hatches too, Dido remarked, looking up at the moon, and she added to herself, I've a kind of notion that Dutiful P might surface tonight, so I'd best be there. It had been an energetic day with the hopscotch, the shuttlecock, the climbing, and hard work on the pipe. Dido turned out the lamp as soon as she reached the cabin, flung herself into the bed, and went straight to sleep. About 2 hours later, she found herself suddenly broad awake. The Sarah Casket was still speeding south before a following wind. Dido could feel the rush of the great seas as they lifted and drove past the ship's sides. Every timber creaked, and even down here the hum of wind in the rigging could be heard. Moonlight came through the ports. A patch of it on the floor hardly shifted. So steady was the ship on her course. Dido wondered what had waked her. Then she felt the clutch of little cold hands on her arm. Who is it? She whispered. It's me, Dutiful Penitence. Ain't you cold just? Best come under the quilt, hadn't you? Dido said matter-of-factly. She felt a small shape huddled up against her under the patchwork. Just at this moment, the steersman evidently altered course a point or so, and the oblong moonshine slid round, revealing the visitor. She was a thin little creature, frail-looking as a cobweb, and no wonder if she's been living on plum jelly ever since Santa Cruz, thought Dido. With long silvery hair not very well brushed, she stared gravely at Dido. Are you really a girl? She asked after a while. Yes, what do you think? A mermaid? But where did you come from? Your pa picked me up off the coast of England. I was in a ship what caught fire and sank. And I've been asleep for 10 months, so Nate says. All that time you was in storage. You were in the sea. Didn't you get scared? It wasn't bad. I hung on to a mast. You must be brave. Are you English? Yes. And don't I just wish I was back in England, Dido remarked with feeling. But your pa says he'll put me on a boat for New Bedford. From New Bedford, wherever that is, near Nantucket. We may unload there before going home. I don't suppose I shall be going home now, Dutiful Penitence said drearily. There's nobody to look after me except Aunt Tribulation. Papa says I won't stay with her. Dear Mamma would never have allowed it. Maybe Cousin Anne Allerton will have me in New Bedford. What's wrong with Aunt Tribulation? Dido asked. She had heard the name before. She's Papa's sister. She's dreadfully sharp and unkind. She lives in Vine Rapids now, but she came to stay once and upset me and Mamma. Mamma would never let Papa invite her again. She said Aunt Tribulation was an Amazon. Oh, she did upset us. She said dear Mamma was a fool for bringing me up to be a crybaby, and that my clothes were ridiculously fussy. What does she look like? I can't remember quite. It was a long time ago when I was there. I remember she scolded me dreadfully because I was afraid of a dog. She said I was a little wet goose. What kind of a dog was it? A spaniel. Said Dido. For a sea captain's daughter, you certainly are a rum 'un. Dutiful, scared of a spaniel. And look here, whoever tied that handle, you must have been Dick to the knob, and I'm not going to lay my tongue round it every time. I'll call you Pen. Agreeable? Yes, thank you, Penitence said shyly. No one ever gave me a short name before. How old are you, Dido? I've sort of lost count, Dido admitted, with the long nap and all. Round about 11, I reckon. What did you do all the time shut up in that cupboard, Pen? Oh, it wasn't bad. Come and see. They lit the lamp, and Penitence showed Dido her little room. It was really a store cupboard with shelves all round, but one of them had been turned into a bunk. There were a few lesson books, writing materials, sewing things, and rows of empty jelly bottles. I did lots of lessons, Penitence explained. And I read the Bible, and I learned a hymn every day. Should I say one? Not just now, thanks, Dido answered promptly. Croupus, ain't you good, though? Didn't you never get fed up? Oh, no, I kept a journal, but it wasn't very interesting, Penitence confessed. And I worked on my sampler. She held up an extremely large square embroidered in cross-stitch with a ship and whales and gulls and a long piece of poetry beginning, Mysterious magnet, ere thy use was known, fear clad the deep horrors not its own. It was nearly finished. I'd sooner have done roses and doves, Penitence went on, but dear Mamma thought it would please Papa if it had sea things. I began it when I was 6. Well, said Dido, I'd have been blue-devilled in here, especially when it's such prime fun on deck. Penitence shivered. I couldn't bear to go on deck. That dreadful sea, I know I'd fall in, and all the cross, rough men, and the horrid smells and dirt. Mamma always said it was dangerous up there. You won't try to make me go, will you? Bless you, no. It ain't my affair. Anyhows, we can have a bang-up time in the cabin, now you've decided to come out and be Sybil. Will you teach me that game with the feathered thing and play tunes on your pipe? Of course I will. Us'll have rare fun. You don't think Mamma would mind? Penitence said hesitantly. She said playing games was a sin. Crew, Dido began, but bit the words back. Her own parents, as she recalled, had never seemed particularly kind or fond of her. At least they were quite sensible. All that was said of Mrs. Casket, however, seemed to suggest that the woman had been an utter fool. Must have been queer in her attic, Dido thought. Reckon she knows better now, she suggested gruffly. Larks, if you never played. What did you do at home? Help with the housework. Well, I done that too, but I played afterward. After I'd done my tasks, Mamma used to let me sit on her lap while she read the Bible, said Penitence. Her composure faltered. If I'd been extra good, she used to sing a hymn. Here, breaking down altogether. Penitence threw herself on the bed, buried her head in the quilt, and cried. She cried very much indeed. Dido looked at her worryingly. There was little consolation to offer. Foolish Mrs. Casket must have been. May have been, but her daughter had plainly thought the world of her. Don't take on so, Dido said after a while with awkward sympathy. Want a hanker-sniff? I've got one. But as Penitence made no reply, just went on crying and shivering and choking, Dido knelt down on the floor by her, feeling oddly grown up and capable and protective, and put an arm round her. Cheer up, she muttered. I'll keep an eye on you. It won't work out so bad, you'll see. The small, silvery head rubbed against her. Will you? Will you really? That I will. And when we get home to Nantucket, will you stay with me then, so Papa don't leave me alone with Aunt Tribulation? Please, please, Mamma once said she couldn't bear for me to be brought up by Aunt Tribulation. She said Aunt Tribulation was a Tartar. The thin arms came round Dido's neck in a tight hug, so that she could hardly breathe. Well, maybe, Dido said reluctantly, just for a little while, till your pa gets fixed up with somebody else. Oh, you're kind. You're so much braver than I am. I'm scared of everything. But you've even been in the sea. If you'll stay with me, it will be much better. Will you promise? All right, Dido said, sighing. Would you sing something now? That song you were singing before? All right, said Dido again. She began to sing in a small, gruff voice. Who'll buy my sweet lavender? 3 bunches a penny, fresh picked in Sevenoaks this morning. 3 bunches a penny. She stroked the tousled head. It lay heavily on her shoulder, and before long drooped in sleep. Dido sat and stared at the lamp, which they had forgotten to turn out. Presently its yellow flame swelled and wavered in a blur of tears. Resolutely she blinked them away. It was stupid to be homesick, but she longed for the familiar London streets where she had played. With a heavy heart, she wondered how long it would be before she saw them again. I'll tell you one thing, Pen, my girl, she muttered as the sleeping Penitence shifted against her. If I'm to look after you, I'm somehow going to get you out of this way of being scat to the whole blame world. And that is the end of chapter 3.